Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. In this episode of Unravelling Autism, we'll be looking at what we mean when we say that autism is a spectrum disorder. In the medical world, autism is commonly referred to as ASD. This is an abbreviation that stands for Autism Spectrum Disorder. Autism is said to exist on a spectrum. And before we look at this aspect in more detail, let's look briefly at what autism is and what its features are. Autism is a developmental disability. People with autism have impairments in social interaction, communication, and they also have repetitive and inflexible patterns of behavior or interests that are atypical for an individual's age and social context. The onset of the disorder is in early childhood. Having autism has a crucial impact on the person's social relationships, their ability to live or function independently, as well as their employment, educational, and occupational abilities and prospects. It has been found that more than half of parents over 50 are still living with their autistic child, as the vast majority of people with autism have difficulties in being able to live independently. People with autism have deficits in all three of the areas that I've mentioned, that is in social interaction, communication, and repetitive interests and behaviors. However, the type and severity of symptoms experienced will vary from one individual to the next. There is a range of intellectual functioning and language and social abilities among people with autism. You may have two children of the same age and gender, but with different intellectual abilities, different language and social abilities, even though both are on the spectrum. As a parent, you may wonder why the information about autism that you read in books or that you get in the media differs so much from what you know about your child. This is because the information may be about a child or a group of children who are somewhere else on the spectrum and whose language, social, and intellectual abilities differs from the abilities of your own child, even though both are on the spectrum. One child with autism may be able to communicate fairly well, attend school, and attend to all his basic personal needs, while you could have another child who is either non-verbal or only able to communicate in the most basic way and might even require assistance to attend to his physical needs on a daily basis. Until recently, experts talked about different types of autism: autism spectrum disorder, Asperger's syndrome, and pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, PDD-NOS. Asperger's syndrome was on the mild end of the spectrum. People with Asperger's could be very intelligent, have a wide vocabulary, and be able to function independently on a daily basis. They could be really focused on topics that interested them and would discuss their special interest topics a lot. However, they still had difficulties with social interaction and would struggle to read social cues in a conversation or a social situation. Pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified was a diagnosis that included most children whose autism was more severe than Asperger's syndrome, but not as severe as the classic case of autism spectrum disorder. Then autism spectrum disorder was the classic diagnosis, once conceived of by a psychiatrist named Kanner. The child may have been nonverbal or have very limited or repetitive speech, be socially isolated, and would also have a learning and or an intellectual disability. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association grouped the autism-related disorders into one term: autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. Therefore, today there are no longer separate diagnoses of ASD, Asperger's, and PDD-NOS. There is one umbrella diagnosis for autism of all severities, with no distinction being made between different intellectual abilities as part of a diagnosis. This move away from different diagnoses has led experts to now talk about what is called high-functioning autism and low-functioning autism. So let's look at high-functioning autism. Firstly, this is not an official medical term or a diagnosis. It is an informal description that people use to talk about a person with autism who is able to do many things and has many skills. For example, the ability to communicate effectively, to read, to write, to manage basic life skills such as eating, grooming, and dressing. This person, although able to communicate, would struggle to make friends, to read social cues, and to interact socially. So the social difficulty is significant for all people with autism. The person would have repetitive interests or behaviors that would seem unusual to others. Some children who are high functioning will do well at school. Others are not able to cope in a school environment and may not be able to focus or concentrate. Some can manage a job. Others are not able to manage a job or a career due to issues such as anxiety or problems with executive functions. Let's look at low functioning autism. Firstly, this term is not used in a disparaging way. What follows here is a basic explanation of the term. However, I would like to say that I don't like the term very much because of the negative connotation that is attached to it, and also because it tends to create a sort of low expectation, which is not something that we would welcome. The term is not part of an official diagnosis, and what it refers to is the general capabilities and behaviors of some individuals with autism. Such children may be nonverbal, or they may be able to speak, but they speak in very repetitive or inflexible ways that do not usually amount to communication or interaction with others. There is usually a developmental delay, an intellectual disability. The child might be socially isolated in a world of their own, with many repetitive physical behaviors or stims, such as rocking or hand flapping. There is a preoccupation with the sensory aspects of objects. For example, they smell, feel, sound of a toy rather than being interested in the function of the toy. Such children may be involved in constant rituals that do not seem to serve an objective purpose, but it may be calming and reassuring for the child. For example, to arrange objects in a pattern. These children would have high support needs. They would need carers to help them to accomplish their daily routines. So are these descriptions important? They don't form part of a diagnosis, but medical specialists may consider the capabilities and impairments of a child in order to provide guidance to parents and to recommend appropriate treatments or therapies. So depending on the capabilities of your child, he will need appropriate support, treatments, and care. For example, a child who is unable to attend to his daily needs, who is socially isolated and does not communicate, will need a carer or a parent or a special schooling facility to take care of him throughout the day, whilst a child who has the ability to communicate and interact socially to a reasonable degree and to take care of himself may be able to attend school, but would also need speech therapy or the assistance of an aide at school. The capabilities of the child will therefore determine the amount and type of support and therapy that they need. Let's look at some of the treatments and therapies that are available. And I would mention that these treatments and therapies are available to children who are anywhere on the spectrum. The professional would actually tailor the program in order to meet the needs and capabilities of that child. Augmentative alternative communication is used for autistic people who cannot communicate orally. People who have problems speaking may be taught to use other forms of communication, such as sign language, computers, interactive devices, and picture systems, communication systems such as PECs. Then there's speech-language therapy, which can help those with autism who need to develop or improve their communication skills. Occupational therapy helps autistic children and adults to learn everyday skills that help them with daily tasks such as personal hygiene and movement. These skills can then be integrated into their home, school, and work environments. Many people with autism can be oversensitive to certain stimuli, such as light or sound, which causes them to overreact. Sensory integration therapy is a kind of therapy that helps people with autism to adapt to different kinds of sensory stimuli. Applied behavior analysis is a therapy that focuses on teaching adaptive behaviors like social skills, play skills, communication skills, and also seeks to diminish problematic behaviors such as self-injury. Medication. There are no medications specifically designed to treat autism. The medications that are prescribed are usually used in the case of co-occurring conditions such as depression, anxiety, or behavioral problems. I'd like to talk a little bit about the neurodiversity movement that exists today. There are many autistic people and autism advocates who see autism as a kind of neurodiversity rather than as a medical or pathological condition. Autistic people are seen as having a natural diversity in the way they think and experience things and as having their own strengths, differences, and weaknesses. Part of this perspective is that you can have an autistic person with high support needs and disabilities due to co-occurring conditions such as anxiety. The idea of high or low functioning autism would be rejected within this movement, as it has the tendency to label or stigmatize a child and to make assumptions about his potential. This movement views autism in a positive way. It advocates for acceptance of autism and autistic behaviors and the recognition of autistics as a minority group in society. The teaching of coping skills is viewed as being more important than the teaching of behaviors that are going to help autistics to fit in. This viewpoint has obviously created some friction between the neurodiversity movement and medical professionals who look at autism as a medical or pathological condition. My view on the movement is that it is important to advocate for acceptance of people with autism and to respect their diversity. So in this respect, I'm fully sympathetic towards the movement. I do, however, consider autism to be a disability because it affects the core capabilities of the person. It affects all their relationships and their entire quality of life. So I feel, therefore, that children with this condition must receive all the necessary help and support that they need in order to improve their quality of life. So people with autism could be on different ends of the autism spectrum, and depending on their capabilities, they will have various needs with regard to support, care, medical treatment, and therapy. Their capabilities should not be overestimated or underestimated. They should be respected for who they are, and they should be supported in order to allow them to reach their full potential. This potential varies and looks quite different from one child to the next. These differences that we find in people with autism must be respected. They have as much right to a good and fulfilling life and to happy social relationships as the next person. The fact that they have different abilities makes no difference to this reality. Thank you for listening. My next video will be about parents of autistic kids and what they can do to cope with some of their daily challenges.